Buenos días, señoras y señores. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for joining us in this spotlight session called Improving Refugee Response Through Evidence. My name is Jose Maria Figueres. I have the distinctive honor of serving as the moderator for this session. I am the chair of DATA, where we are committed to improving refugee response through comprehensive and collaborative ways, and where we are also extremely invested in developing the Refugee Response Index in partnership with many other organizations. We have a very good group of discussion leaders here with us this morning that will talk to the importance of data in refugee response, not only from the national, but also from the international perspective. And of course, we'll also address the importance of data with respect to monitoring and accountability, all driving towards the implementation of the Global Compact. To start us off on this morning's conversation, I would like to introduce Bjorn Gilsater. He is the head of the World Bank UNHCR Joint Data Center on Forced Displacement in Copenhagen. Bjorn, before assuming that responsibility, was in New York between 2016 and 2019, so very much of the process or involved in the process of the New York Declaration in 2016, leading out to the Global Compact on Refugees in 2018. But he also comes with a terrific experience in multilateral organizations, both as a citizen of his country and as an international expert on these issues. Bjorn, please open this up.
Thank you very much, Jose Maria. Let me put the timer on here so I stay on time. I'm delighted to offer these welcoming remarks this morning. And it's good to go early in this three-day marathon that we have ahead of us. I see a lot of bright and eager eyes. So I'm going to start with a few quotes from distinguished thought leaders who have opined on data and evidence in general. And I'm going to start with Sherlock Holmes, who once asserted that it's a capital mistake to theorize before one has data. So let's not. Another highly intelligent person, Edward Deming, has remarked that in God we trust, all others bring data. Yes. He also said that without data, you're just another person with an opinion. And finally, to throw in an economist, heavyweight, John Maynard Keynes, who allegedly responded to an inquisitive journalist at one point where he said that when the facts change, I changed my mind. What do you do, sir? I hope that all of us here in the room, and certainly here on the panel, strongly believe in those quotes. The Global Compact on Refugees has 11 distinct references to the need for better data in order to improve the response to forced displacement, including a separate section 3.3 called Data and Evidence. And I think one can argue that the Joint Data Center is one of the responses to this call. The Data Center was just set up this year, and I assumed my job in August only this year. Our main mission at the Joint Data Center is to enhance the ability of stakeholders, including policymakers, to make timely and evidence-informed decisions by giving them more and better data on refugees, IDPs, stateless people, and other forcibly displaced, as well as their host communities. We will achieve this mission through 5 objectives. First, we will support the strengthening of global data norms and standards. Second, we will support the filling of existing data gaps. We will also support the filling of data analysis and knowledge gaps. We will pursue responsible open data, and we will promote knowledge dissemination and create a community of practice around data on forced displacement. We're currently building a portfolio of 25 to 30 activities for 2020 and beyond that we hope will lead to a step change in the amount and the quality of data on forcibly displaced and their host communities compared to where we are today. Today's session is key, therefore, to our work, and I really look forward to learning from the distinguished partners on the panel and hearing your comments from the floor. The goals for the session are threefold. First, we will emphasize the importance of evidence for policymaking and operational implementation and program design. Second, the session would highlight the importance of collaboration among agencies with national governments in the lead. And third, and final objective is to discuss the role of data in monitoring and accountability. Solid data is needed to monitor progress on the ground. The compact will only be a success if all stakeholders are convinced that refugee response efforts are legitimately implemented. High-quality data is a prerequisite for effective monitoring, and our panel will help us explore these issues in more depth. We're all motivated to find solutions that will improve the well-being of displaced populations and their communities. Such solutions require partnerships with those who hold the knowledge, expertise, and access on the ground. And I look forward to hearing the examples offered by the panel members of successful use of evidence for improving refugee response. So with that, those few words, I'll hand the floor over to you, and I hope to come back at the very end of the session.
Bjorn, thank you very much for having staked out the three main areas in which we want to analyze data on this session. Informing policy, collaboration, and accountability based on data. I am sure that our discussion leaders will address these issues from very different perspectives. So with that, let me turn over to you, Mr. Governor. Governor Honkoli Nanook, the first governor of Turkana, comes with a distinguished political background in his country, has been the Deputy Minister for Forestry, has been a member of Parliament, and an international expert working with NGOs on these issues. Sir, you have just finished a major survey, out of which a tremendous amount of data has come out. How are you using that data?
Thank you. Thank you, moderator, for giving me that opportunity to address this issue that is in the midst of our programming, both at Kenya government level, but also at the subnational level. To support the new approach towards an integrated delivery of service and promotion of self-reliance through improved evidence-based livelihoods program in Kalobeyei, Turkana County, Kenya, UNHCR and the World Bank, in collaboration with the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics, joined together to create comparable welfare and poverty baseline estimates for refugees. In 2018, UNHCR and the World Bank, in collaboration with the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics, collected data on refugees based on the Kenya National Survey to measure poverty. What we learn is that when compared to the most recent poverty data for Kenya, more than half of refugees, 15%, in Kalobeyei live below the poverty line. Though, when compared to nationals living in Turkana County, refugees are better off, as 72% of nationals living in Turkana are below the poverty line. Turkana is one of the poorest counties in Kenya. Compared to the national average, refugees have a higher rate of poverty versus 37% the national average for Kenya. Kalobeyei is home to refugees originating from several countries. The majority are recently arrived within the last 5 years from South Sudan, who constitute 74%, and 13% from Ethiopia, 5% from DRC Congo, 3% from Burundi, and 2% from other countries. Refugees living in Kalobeyei face specific vulnerabilities and challenges. There is a disproportionate portion of the population of refugees who are young, youth, or children. 70% of refugees in Kalobeyei are 19 years of age or younger. This compares to 59% in Turkana County and 50% national average. Half of refugees in Kalobeyei are women, yet most households are headed by women, especially those from South Sudan. 77% of South Sudanese households, which are the majority of the refugees in Kalobeye, are headed by women. In the area of employment, refugees are working much less than the national and Turkana average. While 4 out of every 10 refugees are of working age, 15 to 64 years of age, only about 1/3 of these are employed. Comparatively, 55% of the total population of Kenya are of working age and working while 46% in Turkana are working. In the education area, refugees report higher primary enrollment rates than Turkana County population average, but lower than the national average. 77% of primary school age children in Kalobeye report children attending school versus 82% for Kenya national average and 48% in Turkana County. Secondary school rates are extremely low for both refugees and those in Turkana County. Refugees report 5% secondary school attendance rate for refugees versus 9% of Turkana County and 38% national average in Kenya. In the sector of energy, in energy access, almost no refugee household has access to electricity from the grid or generator. This is comparable to 12% of Turkana County households and 42% national average. Access to water and improved sanitation. Although access to water in Kalobeye is nearly universal, access to improved sanitation is lower than for nationals. Every Kalobeye resident has access to a water point. 2/3 report insufficient quantities of drinking water. Nationally, 73% of Kenyan households have access to a water point versus 63% in Turkana County. Access to improved sanitation is lower for refugees and Turkana residents at 32% than for the Kenya national average at 65%. Female-headed refugee households have lower access at 48% than male-headed households at 60%, which has disproportionate impact on children and youth, given the majority of households are female-headed. In terms of policy insights and recommendations, building and maintaining human capital in the refugee and local Turkana population, especially among girls and women, needs to be prioritized. Second, promoting self-reliant agricultural interventions can help avoid food insecurity in the region. Third, efforts to strengthen access to improved sanitation in the region is a priority to saving lives primarily for children under 5. Fourth, increasing work opportunities for the refugee population can help lift aid dependence and improve livelihoods in the wider region. Fifth, joint programs for refugees and hosts are needed to improve access to services and future improve social cohesion. And lastly, government now has data that it can be able to utilize in order to integrate in its future survey, but also integrate in its annual budgeting and programming. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Governor. You have been very much at the beginning and the origin of this effort, and I want to thank you for sharing with us the way that you are now beginning to integrate this data that you have mentioned into the formulation of policy. Friends, let me now turn to Jessica Guzman, who heads up the Secretariat within the Ministry of Foreign Relations and Cooperation in Honduras. Jessica, before having assumed those responsibilities, invested 10 years of her time in CABEI, el Banco Centroamericano de Integración Económica, and has a distinguished career in her country in setting up public-private partnerships. Now, you, Jessica, have just finished a major survey, una caracterización de los refugiados en Honduras, with the help of GIPS and ACNUR. I believe you published those results on the 11th of December. Okay. Could you please tell us about that and how you're using that data to inform policy within your country?
Thank you very much. Honduras comenzó a finales del 2017 el estudio de caracterización del desplazamiento interno por violencia. Este estudio fue publicado el pasado 11 de diciembre y es el resultado de un proceso interinstitucional efectuado con la participación de 10 instituciones del Estado, 5 organizaciones de la sociedad civil, en colaboración con GIPS y con ACNUR. La metodología que se utilizó para la realización del estudio fue cuantitativa y cualitativa, recolectando información directa de hogares desplazados en el 88% de los departamentos del país, para obtener estadísticas representativas y confiables sobre la magnitud y patrones del desplazamiento interno. Los resultados del estudio muestran que en Honduras, entre el año 2004 y 2018, alrededor de 247,000 personas han sido desplazadas internamente por violencia, habiendo ocurrido el 56% de los desplazamientos en los últimos 5 años. El 55% de estas personas son mujeres y el 43% son menores de edad. Ahora, gracias al estudio, tenemos identificadas las zonas expulsoras, ya que se encontró que cerca del 82% de los desplazamientos ocurrieron en 5 departamentos del país, en zonas que tienen mayor concentración urbana, son zonas de tránsito y también zonas con altos índices de violencia. Encontramos que el 77% de los hogares desplazados habían sido víctimas de hechos específicos de violencia y que eso los forzó a movilizarse. El resto se desplazó como una medida de autoprotección por miedo ante una situación de violencia generalizada. El estudio también nos ha permitido identificar las principales causas y hechos de violencia que ocasionan el desplazamiento, siendo las principales ser objeto de amenazas, asesinatos, tener restricciones a la movilidad, ser víctimas de extorsiones y de violencia sexual, las cuales se dan en la mayoría de los casos dentro de las mismas comunidades. En el marco de estas causas y hechos de violencia, también pudimos identificar que hay una afectación superior en los hombres, en los casos relacionados con extorsiones. Estos por estar vinculados con ocupaciones que en Honduras son ejercidas principalmente por personas de este género. Son profesiones tales como ser transportistas o conductores de mototaxis. El resto de causales, las mujeres y los menores de 18 años tienen un mayor nivel de vulnerabilidad, siendo los grupos más afectados en temas relacionados con lesiones, violencia sexual, usurpación de viviendas y reclutamiento. En el caso del reclutamiento, en su mayoría, personas menores de edad, y esto sucede por parte de los grupos delictivos que nosotros denominamos maras o pandillas. Cabe mencionar que en el estudio también se descubrió que el 48% de las causas de violencia son ocasionados por estos grupos, es decir, por las maras y pandillas. Uno de los principales resultados que obtuvimos es que pudimos recabar de fuente primaria cuáles son las necesidades prioritarias de las personas desplazadas en el momento del desplazamiento. Ellos nos manifestaron que lo que más necesitan es tener un lugar donde alojarse, tener ayuda para trasladarse durante el desplazamiento, contar con acceso a alimentación, a vestuario, artículos de limpieza y otros de necesidades básicas. También pidieron recibir protección durante el movimiento y tener acceso a asistencia psicológica y de salud. Todos estos elementos y muchos otros son el resultado de este estudio que efectuamos. Gracias a él, Honduras ahora cuenta con datos sobre cuáles son las características de las personas desplazadas y cuáles son los hogares afectados, qué hechos de violencia ocasionan el desplazamiento, cuáles son las principales necesidades de asistencia y de protección, cuáles son las intenciones futuras de residencia de los desplazados. También conocer cuál es el nivel de conocimiento de la población sobre los recursos que tiene, cuáles son las instituciones a las que pueden asistir para interponer denuncias cuando están en situaciones de riesgo. Y cuáles son las soluciones duraderas que contribuirían a prevenir, reducir y mitigar los riesgos que provocan esta problemática. El acceso a esta información es indispensable y nos sirve como una base sólida, ya que nos permitirá guiar el desarrollo de políticas públicas de prevención, asistencia y protección para evitar o mitigar el impacto del desplazamiento y alcanzar soluciones duraderas. También, gracias a que ahora tenemos la distribución geográfica y las dinámicas del desplazamiento, hemos identificado las zonas con mayor afectación y así podremos priorizar las acciones de intervención. La información revelada también proporciona claves sobre las características de las personas más vulnerables a la violencia y el desplazamiento, lo que nos permitirá enfocar de una manera más atinada nuestras intervenciones. Y también este estudio respalda los contenidos del proyecto de ley para la prevención, atención y protección de las personas desplazadas forzadamente, la cual actualmente se encuentra en proceso de aprobación en nuestro país. Ahora nos enfrentamos al reto de impulsar medidas inmediatas para proteger a esta población y de promover soluciones para evitar que la situación se agrave y que se vuelva crónica. Estos insumos servirán como base para impulsar diversos compromisos que tenemos como país y que se han contextualizado en el MIRPS, porque cabe mencionar que el tema de desplazamiento interno es uno de los 4 perfiles en los que Honduras trabajó en el marco del MIRPS. Quiero finalizar resaltando que durante el desarrollo del estudio y la revelación de los datos, prevaleció un espíritu generalizado de reconocimiento de la problemática como punto de partida para la búsqueda de soluciones, lo cual es una característica relevante considerando que fue un esfuerzo, como les mencioné, que compartimos entre el gobierno, la sociedad civil y la cooperación internacional. En este sentido, quiero cerrar agradeciendo en nombre del Gobierno de Honduras el apoyo y acompañamiento que recibimos por parte de GIPS y de ACNUR, porque gracias a su colaboración en todo el proceso, desde el inicio en la definición de la metodología hasta la interpretación de los resultados finales, fue vital para garantizar la coherencia y la veracidad de este estudio. Gracias.
Muchas gracias, doña Jessica. Thank you very much. I'll come back to you perhaps towards the end with a couple of questions on your work. And I would like to remind you, friends, that after we hear from all our panelists, we will open it up to your questions to the panelists on their presentations. So let me now turn to Kimberly Robertson. Kimberly, you as Chief of Section at UNHCR are going to be sharing with us some thoughts, both on behalf of UNHCR and of EGRIS, the expert group on refugee, IDP, and statistics. So talk to us, please, Kimberly, about the importance of setting global standards, global processes. Sometimes we hear unfortunate remarks with respect to the importance of global processes vis-a-vis national data collection. And I would like you to address that issue. And then also please talk to us about how we can put that together in a collaborative way with national data to inform policy.
Thank you. Oh, maybe. It's on now. Okay. So thank you very much, Mr. Figueres, for the introduction. And just to say that it's very much an honor to speak to this distinguished assembly. And the UNHCR and the expert group on refugee and IDP statistics is very grateful for this opportunity. And maybe a little introduction. What is EGRIS? What is the expert group on refugee and IDP statistics? It was established in 2016 by the UN Statistical Commission. It was tasked to develop internationally agreed upon standards for data and statistics on refugees and internally displaced persons. The standards or recommendations for statistics on refugees were finalized in 2018 and adopted by the General Assembly in the same year. The final draft for comparable recommendations and standards on IDPs is circulating now for adoption or endorsement in March of 2020. The expert group on refugee and IDP statistics members and contributors are from over 40 member states and some 15 organizations and regional bodies, including the United Nations Children Fund, the International Organization for Migration, Paris 21, and the Economic Commission of Africa. But there's a very long list, so I won't go into it. There is a steering committee composed of the UN Statistical Division, Turkstat, the Joint IDP Profiling Service, GIPS, the World Bank, Statistics Norway, and UNHCR. So what do these recommendations cover? So what do they define categories for statistical reporting purposes that are based on the Refugee Convention and on the guiding principles for IDPs. The categories also reflect some national and regional considerations and experiences. They provide guidance on minimum reporting on data on refugees and IDPs, methodologies for data collection and data management, as well as prioritization of well-being and integration measures that are aligned with, but of course not limited to, the SDG and the Agenda 2030. This is because we expect the recommendations, or we like to think that the recommendations will outlive the agenda, and there is a post-SDG data world. They also describe how the different parties engaged in data and statistics, including line ministries and international organizations, should collaborate. And as such, they are the first international comprehensive framework that addressing data and statistics issues for forcibly displaced persons. And they are equally relevant for humanitarian and development actors, for national and international bodies, as well as for governmental and non-governmental institutions. So why does this matter? Why do they matter to UNHCR, to those of us that are here today at the Global Refugee Forum, and to states? So I think that speak briefly to two reasons. The first relates to why standards matter and their overall contribution to decision-making and results. So as a quotation, Bjorn had lots of quotations. I'll go back to one of my colleagues who once said to our director in trying to convince us that investment in standard setting was worth it, it said standards could set you free. So say I perhaps qualified, or perhaps freer is how I might say it in this case. But for the data experts and statisticians, they are then freer to focus on the data, on getting the data results and working closely with data sources. For decision makers, they're freer to focus on the meaning of those results rather than questions about the figures themselves. And I think the comments we've had from both the Honduras and Kenya representatives on the panel indicate that they trusted the data that they received. By creating somewhat of a common framework, and it doesn't have to be a necessarily perfect framework, but one that is at least shared and accepted by many, this tension shifts from queries and sometimes disagreements about the data itself to questions of the causes, impacts, and hence the subsequent decisions and actions that need to be taken. So standards help to create a common, shared, and collectively known starting point, giving opportunities to arise for enhanced informed decision-making and less data-driven dissension. The second is about the increasing importance of engagement with national statistical systems when it comes to data, particularly relevant in the spirit of this forum. Refugees and IDPs are generally invisible within national statistical and data systems. There are, of course, exceptions, but this is for a variety of reasons. For example, the relevant data can be held within a line ministry or remain isolated from national institutions in the humanitarian community. Bringing refugees and internally displaced persons into the system is key to understanding how displaced people figure within the national context and for the relevant impact, needs, and opportunities to figure adequately in national planning. And I think we've heard that today. The data revolution has brought radical changes to the nature, volume, and methods to capture, process, and use data. This is particularly evident to date within the private sector. But the statistical community, which is essentially the heart and soul of the data community, has begun to fully embrace big data, citizen data, predictive analytics, nowcasting, open data, and transformations in the way that data and statistics are represented and made available. These advances, combined with those long-standing principles that underline the statistical community of independence, trust, and transparency, create what we like to think of as a sustainable data revolution that will continue to transform the scope and the relevance of the global, regional, and national statistical systems. So we also asked them, what are the challenges in relation to UNHCR in this work? And there are many known challenges in bringing evidence into decision and policy making, and many of these are as relevant for displaced populations and displacement situations. But I'll speak quickly about two. And I think it's interesting that the presentations beforehand indicated the value of doing this work. And so sometimes we may fear or not like the data says about the situations in their host communities. And this is not uncommon, and UNHCR is very familiar with a lot of this. But the collaboration and commitment, as mentioned by our hosts as well, that are important drivers for this forum, starts when there's a shared understanding and ultimately an acknowledgement of the scope, dimensions, the magnitude, and the impact of forced displacement situations. And this is where the added value of data statistics comes to the dialogue that's taking place. And that's what we've heard so far. And I think we are challenged. We can't let the weight of myths that are perpetuated by the absence of evidence to become an insurmountable barrier to our collective better judgment, particularly undermining our responsibility to displaced people and the communities that host them. So this is why we need the courage and the commitment to work within an agreed set of data standards that were designed to facilitate transparency and trust, and that's transparency and trust required for evidence-informed decision-making to happen. Another potential particular challenge related to these recommendations has to do with the rates of change and expectations. These recommendations and standards will not bring an immediate expansion in data availability international or even within national statistical systems. We are actually witnessing a reduction in state reporting on refugee and asylum figures in the last few years. Statistical systems are often under-resourced, and national statistical bodies often lack the status needed to quickly drive change and lead the coordination necessary. UNHCR is new to working with national and international statistical bodies. But nonetheless, we see very positive signs. And even today, with governments such as Kenya and Honduras, they indicate that it is possible and that there is an effort and the use of their national statistical bodies to coordinate with others to become owners, to become contributors to this information. Morocco, Canada, Morocco, Thailand, and Colombia are also taking great steps using the recommendations to advance their own work in working with data and across different partners. There has been the adoption of a refugee indicator into the SDG indicator framework that was agreed to in this October. There's generous funding that's being offered from the European Union for the implementation, to support the implementation of the recommendations, as well as the invaluable partnership of the World Bank and the UNHCR Joint Data Center in taking this forward. So it is possible to advance. So thank you.
Kimberly, thank you very much. You've been working on data issues for a good number of years, and your expertise certainly shows in your presentation here this morning. So thank you for your good work and encouraging words. Peter, let me turn to you, if I may. Peter Klanzo, who is the head of program division for the Danish Refugee Council. Peter comes with a vast experience combining both work at the office or headquarters in programs and specifically policy, but also a lot of field experience in the Middle East and Eastern Africa. So Peter, let me turn it over to you, please.
Thanks a lot. And I hope everybody has an interesting session. Certainly I have. It has been a pleasure to listen to my colleagues. I'm here to speak about a vision, not as an expert, but as an agency that will support the Refugee Response Index. And I'm going to talk a little bit about why that initiative is important for the DCR. A couple of my colleagues has been quoting. I also have a quote, just to be part of the collective, and that is, if you can't, I don't know who said it, but if you can't see it, it doesn't exist. I may not necessarily agree in total with that, but there's a point about it. And when we talk about the DCR, it is absolutely important that we are able to measure the progress of the DCR. If it is to become a success, we need to be able to talk about whether it has succeeded or whether it has failed. And to that end, there's a couple of things that need to be in place. There needs to be indicators, and indicators is negotiated agreements about what constitutes success of the DCR as well as failures. And that is absolutely critical that we have those. It's important, that has also been said, that we have data that we are able to analyze and that we are able to use to be able to talk about whether the DCR as a comprehensive framework is a success nationally as well as globally for people affected by displacement. It's also important that we have mechanisms that are credible and independent, able to say whether commitments that we will see being pledged this week, commitments that are part of the DCR is being measured and analyzed and documented. It's important that we are able to have systems that are detailed enough to say something about national progress, but also able to compare across different countries and whether commitments are being adhered to vis-à-vis the DCR. The problem is, and I think Kim was outlining that data on displacement are not, on refugees are not easy to get. They are not necessarily always being captured in national systems. And sometimes refugees themselves are not really that keen on being registered because it, for some various reasons, can be a challenge. But fortunately, over the last year, I think, Kim, you were mentioning some of those initiatives. We are increasingly being aware that that is needed. Within the NGO sector, a number of initiatives has blossomed up over the last 4 to 5 years. The Joint IDP Profiling Service, which is a collaboration with UNHCR and other agencies that are looking at and helping systems to profile IDPs. The Internal Displacement Monitoring Center has been there for many years to highlight the situations of IDPs. The protection information management systems, which are looking into protection issues for refugees. So there has been a number of, and many more initiatives on program. And the Refugee Response Index is one very, very, very important addition that has come. It was conceived in 2016, and it was a vision about the need to have a comprehensive system by which to monitor progress when it comes to refugees. And of course, it speaks very, very well into the DCR and the needs of accountability towards the commitments. I'm not going into the details because we have a video that we will show in a moment, but just to say that the Refugee Response Index is notable by its comprehensiveness. It does cover all the aspects, or have the ambitions to cover all the aspects of the DCR. It has the ambitions to be able to say something about progress at national level. It has the ambitions to be able to talk about progress also from the perspective of refugees themselves. And then it has the ambitions of being able to use not only hard data, quantitative data, but also qualitative data. But I'm not going more into the detail. I will ask my distinguished colleague to show a video that will highlight more detail what the Refugee Response Index are.
From Venezuela to Yemen, more than 70 million people have been uprooted by conflict, persecution, disasters, or poverty. These people need assistance and protection from countries assuming their moral, political, and legal responsibilities. But nowadays, restrictive refugee policies are growing increasingly common. More than ever, there's a crucial need to uphold the refugee protection system. So, how are countries behaving towards refugees? The Refugee Response Index analyses countries' response to refugees in a global and independent manner. Its assessments cover countries' response to the various needs of refugees, such as protection, health, rights, or information, in order to cover all the different components of the global refugee response. The RRI team consulted international refugee law experts, policymakers and practitioners, partners in the field, and refugees themselves, to define the most relevant thematic areas, which have been divided into 6 pillars. In this way, the RRI will examine countries' performance with regards to topics such as education, integration, or refugee rights. It takes into account cross-cutting factors such as age, gender, and diversity, but also countries' profiles and capacities. The data feeding the pillars is to be collected by 100 field-based focal points. To do so, they will use a methodology and a guidebook developed through regional workshops. Data collected by focal points is to be systematically reviewed by regional coordinators. Measurements will be scrutinized, inconsistencies identified, and results calibrated, and finally compiled into a country-level report and online platform that will be shared with all stakeholders, including local communities and refugees. The RRI recognises the varying contributions countries make towards refugee protection without acting as a ranking tool. It contributes to international efforts to address challenges of increased displacement, promotes fairer responsibility sharing by all states, and complements UNHCR efforts to monitor the implementation of the Global Compact on Refugees. As a collaborative, multi-stakeholder initiative, the RRI gathers and strengthens networks of local, regional and international actors, whose common goal is to improve outcomes for refugees and asylum seekers, for the sake of humanity and human dignity.
Thanks a lot. Nice video. Let me just say a few words about the status. The methodology is still under refinement. The indicators are still under refinement. The ambition is to test the framework in a couple of countries in 2020. And we will also invite for interested countries that are interested in being part of the pilot. This is not an easy task. It is still a vision in the sense that it is not yet there. Data availability, as we talked about, it's rests very strongly on existing data. It's also not an easy task. It's quite complex to monitor the full comprehensiveness of the DCR. It is about finding a balance between granular precisions. The different contexts in different countries are very different. The work so far has shown that, but it also needs to be able to demonstrate a comparability across countries. And then it requires credibility. This is not something that you build up over a day. It is a long-term process to get the credibility that allows such an index to be trusted and being used. And then it's also not blind for the fact that it does maneuver in a very political sensitive environment. Perspective on how on refugees and refugee situations is also and often a very political issues. DRC, the Danish Refugee Council, are very much in support of the initiative. We think it's absolutely crucial that there is an accountability mechanisms. We think it's absolutely crucial that there is an alternative accountability mechanisms by the accountability mechanisms led by UNHCR, one that are led by the civil society, and can provide that perspective. And therefore we do regard and see and will continue to support the Refugee Response Index in its further way ahead. And we certainly invite others to join as well, both as being willing to pilot, but also in terms of funding. I'm not the expert. There will be colleagues that will be available for more technical, detailed questions should those arise. I will be able to speak about why we and continue to believe that this is a very, very important initiative. Thank you.
Peter, thank you very much for the detailed explanation and the video. I may come back to you at the end if there's time for questions on the workshops. You mentioned workshops, and I'd like to see if we can flesh that out. So let me now turn to our last discussion leader before we open it up to all of you, Ravda Nur Kuma. So the name Nur, which is a beautiful name, we have heard of here and there, but never Ravda. And so I asked her what the meaning of Ravda was, which is garden in the paradise. A beautiful name your mother chose. Ravda Nur is a founding member of the Global Refugee-led network, and she is a co-founder of the Ravda Nur Foundation, which concentrates on fighting for the rights of refugees, particularly young girls, preventing child marriage, looking at issues that deal with higher education as a way of empowering them. From your perspective, Ravda Nur, how can we get refugees much more involved in the monitoring of resources and funds that are spent on them? And do you have some practical examples of that taking place that you could share with us?
First of all, founder and CEO of Ravda Nur Fund, a refugee-owned and operated non-profit NGO whose mission is to be an advocate for all refugees. And I am also a refugee myself, fled from Syria at the age of 14. I live in Turkey, and I am a university student studying political science and international relations department in Turkey. I'm also a part of the Global Refugee-led network, for which I am speaking on behalf today. As all of you know, Turkey is housing more than 3 million refugees and had the highest number of refugees in the world. Let me put that in perspective. For you, imagine the entire population of Ireland or New Zealand or Denmark being refugees. This number is also higher than about 110 countries in the world, about half of the countries in the world. But refugees are not just numbers or data. One of the main things when we talk about data is that we forget that we are talking about a human, about people. Let's first humanize data. That is why we, as a global refugee-led network, want to see more refugees taking charge of what is happening to refugees. Fund collected and spent on refugee-related projects has to be transparent. Refugees and refugee-led organizations has the right to monitor and evaluate all implemented projects to ensure transparency and that the goals has been achieved. Refugees and refugee-led organizations can play a very important role in determining whether such projects are necessary or not, as they are first-hand data and information collectors. All stakeholders, UNHCR, NGOs, INGOs, has to make their financial reports related to all refugee-related projects available for inspection. We, as refugee representative at the Global Forum, we call on UNHCR and other stakeholders to support the establishment of at least one refugee observer seat on the UNHCR, EXCOM, and the Standing Committee. We call on UNHCR and regional institutions to work with us on creating a refugee-led advisory body that would inform their work on regional levels. We call on all stakeholders to increasing the monetary and non-monetary resources to support the refugee-led involvement. Finally, we ask all stakeholders to make the refugee participation pledge a multi-stakeholders commitment to meaningfully engage refugees in all aspects of refugee policy making. I am happy to say that a number of countries, including Denmark, Canada, the Netherlands, and Australia, have already endorsed the pledge, as well as NGO, including DRC, humanitarian organizations, and the private sector. And I want to say that we did not born as a refugee, and the conflict is not our fault. Thank you for listening.
Nur, thank you very much. You mentioned a refugee admin committee, or you mentioned some committees that you thought could help. Executive committee. Pardon me? Standing committee. Standing committee. We may come back to you on that to flesh out your thoughts. Friends, let me now open it up to you for questions. I would ask that you please identify yourself and that you also share with us to whom of the discussion leaders you would like to pose your question. Right here. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Juan Cruz Perusia. I'm coming from the UNESCO Institute for Statistics. My question is for the two panelists that presented the national cases, Kenya and Honduras. Well, they presented very interesting result of a specific ad hoc studies that were implemented in your country, well, around the concepts or different concepts of forced displaced populations. I wanted to know if there have been any efforts at the national level to integrate, well, the concept that you have used for those studies, refugees, internal displaced population because of violence, in regular surveys or data or other types of information systems, such as household surveys or in education management information system, for example, in order to be able to track basically that situation regularly on different areas. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Jessica, let's start off with you, please, and then we will come to you, Mr. Governor.
Actualmente, la data que tenemos, en Honduras sí existe el seguimiento que se le da y tratamos de integrar a los refugiados dentro de las comunidades de acogida. Sin embargo, el estudio que realizamos no incluía data relacionada con el acceso de estas personas, por ejemplo, a temas como el acceso a servicios de educación, temas, por ejemplo, relacionados con el acceso a trabajo permanente para las personas desplazadas o refugiadas, y tampoco sobre temas de salud. Esa precisamente es una de las brechas que identificamos y es algo en lo que nosotros tenemos que trabajar.
Muchas gracias. Mr. Governor, sir?
Yeah, I think thank you for that useful question. Indeed, that Kenya has begun integrating refugee data into its planning processes. And this particular one was conducted together with the body responsible for collecting data and statistics, the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics. And at the moment, Kenya just finished a population census in August that is also partly looking at the socioeconomics, whose results are not yet released, but also the rollout of the continuous household survey that is beginning this month is going to incorporate this specific target data for refugees, because this data hasn't been featuring in our integrated data system. But now that information is available, and it is also going to be informing the education policy that is being developed for refugees and asylum seekers. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Governor. Yes, sir, the gentleman here, right here in the back.
I'm representing Denmark. Thank you for some interesting presentations. I got a question for Governor Nanok and for Bjørn Gilsæter from the Joint Data Center. This morning we went to a really interesting session on partnerships for addressing forced displacement in Africa, and it was stressed during that it's really incredibly important to form partnerships across the humanitarian development nexus, working with humanitarian actors, development partners, private sector actors, and very much, if possible, under government leadership. And I think Governor Nanok's intervention definitely showed the importance of that. And in that, we think it's really important that all actors can feed from the same kind of data that has been verified, that is of credible and quality nature, to basically to build a joint understanding of the concrete situation that partners are trying to address, the challenges, the opportunities, the actual socioeconomic situation of people, like Governor Nanok was reflecting on the poverty data. Really very interesting. And it's for the very same reason that we are very happy to both be funding and supporting and hosting the Joint Data Center in Copenhagen. Now, it would be interesting if both of you perhaps could speak to how you intend to disseminate and work with partners on the basis of the data that you're producing, both in the concrete example of Turkana West, because there's a whole range of partners there involved in responding within the integrated socioeconomic development plan for Kisidep or Kakuma. So that would be interesting how you plan to reach out to partners there, but equally so with the joint data center, how will you work at the global level in making sure that partners across all stakeholders actually can feed from the data that you'll be producing? Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. So your question was asked to Governor Nanok and to who else? I'm sorry?
To Bjørn Gilsæter, who's sitting next to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Governor.
Those are very useful comments and a question on this particular issue. In fact, we work in Turkana, and also the whole of Kenya, we work very closely with partners, be it the UN agencies, the NGOs, and the private sector. So these results are going to be disseminated both locally in Kakuma, but also at the county level, so that all the partners are aware of this input, but also at the national level. And I think one of the things that I will do during our, I will urge the forum I sit in, the Council of Governors, is also when we have in January or February, March, when we have the devolution conference, we can be able to bring in, have a topic to discuss these results and many other issues about refugees, in inclusion of refugees in Kenya, so that we can be able to disseminate this info. But most of it, on top of it is this data to inform the review of KISDEP, which is almost about the midpoint, but also to inform the review of the CIDP and all the other programmings that partners who have programs in Turkana can be able to review and make sure that it's aligned. Their programs and targeted interventions are aligned with these new results that are showing the particular situation of refugees and those communities.
Thank you, Mr. Governor. Bjorn?
Thank you very much for your observation and question, and Thomas. And let me also really express our sincere thanks to Denmark and the Danish government for all the support that you're lending to setting up the joint data center. The question was not planted, but it may seem like it. You will find over by the entrance a little postcard. I know we're going green, so we decided to just have a postcard out there. And it has two sides. One is a QR link to a literature review on forced displacement, where you will find some 300 plus academic and think tank articles neatly summarized on a page each about. So this is a database that we're building on evidence and facts related to forced displacement. It's categorized into 7 different categories, that is one way for us to create a sense of community and a shared platform for evidence and data. We will. Another step in that direction is that we're convening a research conference in mid-January together with the editors of the Journal of Development Economics, which are professors at Brown University and at Harvard University. We're doing it together with the World Bank's research department, where we will convene some of the foremost researchers, particularly from the economic side, on forced displacement. And around that research conference, which is a day and a half, we will create events for that appeals to the broader community of people who are in this space. Do go to the website where we have information on this research conference, and you will be able to watch many of the events online at that point.
Thank you, Bjorn. We have a question from Rochelle at UNHCR that came in. She's following the session on WebEx. And her question is on the RRI, so I will go to you, Peter. The question is, how is the RRI related or linked, or maybe not linked, to the indicator framework for the Global Compact on Refugees?
Hello? Yes, it works. Well, I will answer as a team member of the RRI. It is a very pertinent question. I don't know from where it comes from. I understand, but it's fine. The RRI has been having contacts with HCR specifically on this issue. Well, I have to introduce myself. Ricardo Solé is manager of the RRI at this moment. We were having contacts with UNHCR in terms of how to link these global compact indicators into our approach. And we understand that the RRI pretends or intends to complement the information that the global compact is actually capturing. What we actually did at the end is to introduce in our framework of indicators that we have around 200 indicators, actually the GCR ones, to make sure that there are not inconsistencies in the way we approach our measurement of information. So at this moment, we are making all the efforts to ensure that we are not stepping into contradiction or inconsistencies with the GCR. We all know that the GCR is still a tool on the making, that the indicators are limited, and what we actually want is to make it a more comprehensive tool.
Thank you very much. The gentleman in the back, please.
Hello. Is it working? Okay. Thank you all. I would like to thank, first of all, Rav Danur for emphasizing that refugees are not just numbers. I totally agree with her. By the way, I'm representing Turkish Ministry of Family, Labor and Social Services. I was just thinking whether we can use data, with the caveat that Ravda has underlined, to indicate and to estimate what should be the scope of international cooperation in dealing with refugee situations. Because, as you may all know, and as it is already underlined clearly, that our country is hosting more than 4 million refugees or refugee-like situations, and it has been somehow unfair to load all this burden on one country. We do not ignore international cooperation. That has been the case so far, but it should also be underlined that higher participation or improved burden sharing is necessary. Having said that, I just wanted to ask, how could this data or evidence we collect and we analyze can be used to estimate or to decide the scope of international cooperation? Thank you.
I don't have the answer to that, I think, but because it's complex. But I think from the RRI perspective, it is of course the global conflict of refugees has commitment from all states. There are hosting states, and there are states that are also contributing financially. And in a sense, in order to have a useful framework for measuring progress on the compact, such a comprehensive monitoring framework, accountability framework, needs to be able to speak to the accountabilities of all contributing states, as well as other actors. And I think that is also one of the sort of methodological challenges, exactly how do you do that, and how do you weight certain states that are hosting many refugees and other states that may more contribute by way of funding, and how do you index? Hence also why RRI is about indexing. How do you indexing those types of contributions? They're equally important, but it needs to be sort of indexed in such a way that one can compare. And of course, that is a methodological challenge. And that is where I'm not the expert. There will certainly be colleagues around here that will speak more into the nitty-gritty details. But from from an organization, it is important that all those contributions are being able to be sort of compared. Otherwise, the discussions become endless and useless. Thanks.
Thank you, Peter. We have time for maybe one more question, right here. So there are two questions. We'll take them both. Please.
Hi, Karen Hargrave from the British Red Cross. So my question is based on research which we carried out recently in Bangladesh with the Humanitarian Policy Group at ODI, which was exploring the application and the impact of the Global Compact on refugees and the refugee crisis there. I think we're very much reflecting the remarks from the panel. We found that our research really highlighted evidence as being crucial for building the argument and for building support for the Global Compact on refugees at the national level. And so in terms of building that argument, one of our findings was the question of whether there are ways we can find to measure the costs of not applying the Global Compact on refugees and its principles. So, for example, the cost of delayed attention to host communities as part of refugee responses. So the question really, it's perhaps to UNHCR, but to others on the panel, as to whether this is something you've explored or would be open to exploring as part of efforts to collect data to support the Global Compact on refugees.
Thank you so much. Kimberly?
I think it's a very interesting question, and one that I haven't heard personally discussed so far, but it's always in the assumption of these things is you always look to sort of the clear, right? You always look to the yes. But this whole concept that we might actually explore what are the costs of not doing something, I think is very provocative, and thank you very much for raising it. I'm pretty sure we've not explored how to cost when we don't do the things we'd like to do, but I like it, and I think that we should take that a little bit further, because sometimes it's very easy to only look at one side of the equation, and to have a balanced perspective and any sort of logic process, you need to ask the question both ways, and thank you for that. So yes, yeah.
Thank you. And one last question.
Thank you very much. I didn't realize I would be the last question, but it's a question that's open to the whole panel for answering. I should say thank you very much for a really comprehensive and rich panel. I think it's covered, I'm Natalia, working with the Joint IDP Profiling Service. It's been a really rich panel and quite comprehensive in the sense of different data topics with the national perspective, the sub-national perspective, data on protection, data on socioeconomic impact of displacement, the role of standards and norms in ensuring a sustainable data revolution, and of course the interest from just the range of panelists there from civil society, humanitarian development perspectives on this issue. So thank you very, very much for a very rich panel. My question is quite an open question in terms of really what are the key priorities? Is it capacity building? Is it new technologies? Is it better coordination? What are really the key priorities from both an investment side, but also for the community to really focus their efforts on to really improve data for comprehensive response? Thank you.
Thank you, Natalia. So on key priorities, any discussion leader would like to take that on? Peter?
I have two. One is agreement about what is successful implementations of the DCR. I think that's absolutely key. Different avenues to that. Either one can go very high up in the having a few indicators that are very high up, but it is a negotiated process. I think the colleagues from Turkey was hitting the nail of saying the different contributions to the different commitments, and how do we measure them towards each other. It is at the core of the discussions, but it is absolutely crucial that we get an agreement about what constitutes success and an ability to measure that. And then beneath all that lies the indicators, and I think we have also here in the panel seen that indicators on refugees are not that easy to get. We have good examples of where it has been achieved, but we've also heard that in many cases it falls outside the national system, and that speaks into capacity development and political will to include refugees as part of national statistical bureaus. And for that reason, I would say those are the two: agreements and building capacity.
Thank you very much, Peter. So we're coming to the close of our session. I would like to call on Bjorn in a minute for key takeaways from the session. But before that, let me offer the word to our discussion leaders. If you have something that is really on your chest that you would like to say in final closing 1-minute remarks, please do so now.
You asked me to explain about the standing committee.
Please.
The standing committee and
Please press your microphone.
Oh.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
It's okay.
It's on. Yeah. The standing committee and executive committee, EXCOM, are the governing bodies of UNHCR. Currently, there is no refugee representation on these committees. Creating a refugee seat would ensure refugee could influence decision-making at UNHCR. Refugees would not just be on panels, but would be involved in how decision-making also.
Thank you very much. ¿Algo más, doña Jessica? ¿En un minuto no está bien?
Solamente resaltar que para nosotros haber efectuado este estudio representa una línea base sobre la cual hemos tomado diversas decisiones a nivel de país, dentro de las que se encuentran, por ejemplo, fortalecimiento del marco legal. Esto nos sirvió como base para respaldar el estudio de la ley específica sobre desplazamiento que tenemos y también para tomar diferentes ideas sobre diferentes programas y proyectos que necesitamos implementar como una solución de protección a todas estas personas que son desplazadas.
Muchas gracias. Mr. Governor?
Yeah, the Kalobeye example provides comparative welfare and poverty baseline estimates for refugees. And thus, this provides us lessons of how poverty and welfare information may be collected in similar settings, plus facilitate potential replication, but also promote the inclusion of refugees in future national household surveys. And I think it is critical that we continue collecting data, including many other areas that have been suggested in the floor here, particularly on the areas of costing. I think it is important to have this data so that it keeps informing us on how we need to plan and improve our programming better.
Thank you, Mr. Governor. Kimberly?
Yes, quickly. Just to go back to the recent decision from the expert group on the statistics for and the indicators for the SDG framework, to agree to include an indicator dedicated entirely to refugees within the SDG framework. So this is a significant achievement. It allows for discussion in the Agenda 2030 that can be focused on refugees, in addition to normal disaggregation, the consideration of disaggregation of certain other indicators that are identified or qualified. So there is within that context the opportunities now looking through the refugee indicator as a potential focal point, a North Star for discussions, but also to look at the other ways this data that we were speaking of and people have shared with us can be provided for refugees in the context of using SDG indicators to allow for that comparison and integration into national considerations and national reporting. And national statistical organizations and bodies are very excited to do this and are looking at very innovative ways about increasing the availability of disaggregated data along SDG indicators. And this is a great opportunity as well for the discussions on a compact and the things that it's trying to achieve.
Thank you, Kimberly. Peter?
Yeah, and I think what I will probably emphasize here in the end is the importance of states and UNHCR taking up the responsibility for the accountability framework of the DCR, but it's equally and in certain cases perhaps even more important that the civil society also take up their role in terms of contributing, but also complementing the state-led account of what is success. And there I do believe that our is one of the initiatives that are perhaps most courageous and most ambitious at the moment that are out there, and that is why we are supporting it. And I certainly hope that others will also be stimulated to support the II as we move along in the future.
Thank you, Peter. Bjorn, let me turn to you, please, for key takeaways.
That's a big ask, but thank you. I'll just one point. I've learned a new quote here. If you don't see it, it doesn't exist. I think that speaks so clearly to why we're here today, and it relates directly to the 2030 agenda, leaving no one behind, and how pleased, what a great step forward it is to now have a refugee indicator in the SDG indicator framework. I feel that the panel has responded to the three objectives of the session, the importance of evidence for policymaking, the importance of partnerships and collaboration. I think all the examples here were really about working in collaboration and with governments in the leadership role. And the importance of evidence for monitoring and accountability. I think one of the challenges is that we're here preaching to the converted. We all believe in this, and that's why we're in the room. There are many people who are not in the room who we need to reach as well. And that's one of my pet peeves, is that we produce a lot of data, a lot of information, but do we make it accessible? Or do we spend enough time making it accessible? Visualizing data, and I think there's a big challenge there that that often tends to go under-resourced, if you want. And let's. I'm energized by the fact that there's so much attention to this right now. Data, statistics is the ultimate global public good. A global public good always suffers from underfunding. And not enough attention. But I sense that there is a broad range of support for this agenda, and I hope that we can build on that and really create a step change in the quality and the quantity of data on forcibly displaced populations.
Bjorn, thank you very much. Friends, 70 million people displaced around the world, with geopolitical tensions on the rise and climate change yet not brought under control. This is a challenge that is only going to increase with time. And with fiscal pressures and deficits in major nations around the world, the need to become ever more efficient in how we deal with refugees in a dignified way, where we give them the opportunities they deserve, we reintegrate them into societies, and they are not a number, but every one of them a person, as was mentioned here, is of the utmost importance. And hence, data at the national level and at the international level is going to be increasingly important in being able to fine-tune our response in a way that makes absolute sense and the best use of resources, not only for the refugee response, but of course also for the monitoring of programs as they go forward, and for the accountability. Above and beyond that, for the implementation of the Global Compact, which is something that is work in progress and on which we have to continue to strive and move. Thank you ever so much for your work in this field. Thank you again for your participation in this discussion on improving refugee response through evidence. Particular thanks to the Joint Data Center, Bjorn, one of our 4 organizers, EGRIS, the Expert Group on Refugee IDP Statistics, GIPS, the Joint IDP Profiling Service, thank you so much, and of course the Refugee Response Index as the 4 organizers of this session. Muchísimas gracias y que vayan con bien.